Welcome back to Get Down to Business. Today, we're diving deep into the world of organizational culture, something that can make or break a company's success and the happiness of its employees. Our guest is a leading expert in this field. She's an organizational psychologist, a former Microsoft director, co-founder of the employee experience software company Klein, and now heads the Paris Phoenix Group, where she helps companies transform their culture. She's also the host of the Happy at Work podcast and the author of the upcoming book, The Power of Culture. Please welcome Laura Hamill. Laura, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. Let's start with your journey. What drew you to the field of organizational psychology, and how did your experience at Microsoft and Klein shape your perspective on company culture?
Good question. Thanks so much for having me. So I luckily found organizational psychology when I was an undergrad. I loved psychology, but I knew that I probably didn't want to deal with life and death problems that lots of clinical psychologists luckily deal with. Felt really hard to me. So I found business psychology, and I have loved it ever since. And so I have had lots of really great opportunities, but very early in my career, I realized that really anything that you're trying to do in an organization, any improvement, any change you're trying to take on, you have to understand culture. Culture can be working with you or it can be working against you. And so I learned through all my experiences, if I'm trying to focus on employee engagement, if I'm trying to focus on employee well-being, whatever the topic is, culture is usually at the heart of it. So I learned that I needed to understand it. And then I started realizing, the science of culture is very different from the practice of culture. They shouldn't be so far apart from each other. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, The Power of Culture, is I really wanted people to understand that, there are things that we can do that are still science-based that can help us understand culture better and create the cultures that we really need to be successful.
Absolutely. And you founded the Paris Phoenix Group to help companies transform their cultures. What was the driving force behind starting your own firm? What makes your approach so unique?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to start my own business and focus specifically on culture. That was one of the things I did with some of my work in other places, but I've been so entranced by it, I guess you could say. I love the topic and I see the power of it so much, kind of the title, that I decided I wanted to focus on it pretty exclusively. And so that was kind of the driving idea behind starting the business. And what my approach is definitely not saying, hey, you need to create this kind of culture that I'm going to tell you and solve for you and make it yours. It's actually teaching people about the process and the journey of doing the culture work, because every organization has unique context, right? Unique things they're trying to achieve, unique history. So that context is so important. So instead, I bring a methodology or an approach that you can take, and I really talk about it like rolling up your sleeves and doing the culture work. I'm not going to give you the answers, but I'll help you with the process of how you really understand the culture that you need for your organization to be successful.
Absolutely. Laura, a study from MIT Sloan found that a toxic culture is the strongest predictor of employee attrition.
Yes.
What are some of the most damaging effects of a toxic work environment?
Yeah, there's dramatic ones, right? There are the big dramatic ones where something, really bad happens, where there's harassment or some kind of, abuse. Of course, you can think about, that from maybe a leader or manager who has bad behavior. So that's the extreme end of it. But it also can be toxic from the perspective that's a little less dramatic, of just people coming to work and going through the motions and feeling like they're not doing any of their best work, right? They're not really inspired. And so that's a little bit more common, right? It's toxic because you just are going through the motions. And so I think a lot of times we talk a lot about the more extreme examples because they're so inflammatory and awful. But I think there's also this toxic culture where people just aren't valued, where they aren't really connected with the capability or the support to be able to do good work. And they're just kind of going through their lives being kind of miserable and waiting, the kind of constantly waiting for Friday feeling. And it's just such a shame, right? Because we are spending so much of our time at work. So there's a lot of really extreme examples, but I think there's also just the day-to-day humdrum, work could be so much better for so many of us, part of culture that needs to be worked on too.
So briefly, before we cut to break, I'm curious, Laura, what does it mean to create a more human-centric company culture, and what are the benefits of doing so?
Yeah, so this is something actually has been a bit of a evolution for me, because when I first started doing culture work, I said, I'm pretty agnostic to what kind of culture you're trying to create. Let me just help you with the process. Can help you connect it with your business strategy. But over time, I've started to get a little bit more opinionated about that. And so what I really believe is that every culture and every set of values, which is really this, smaller set of focused culture attributes, they always need to have the human as part of them. Of course, we can think about winning and execution, but you've got to have a focus on how do we treat each other when we're at work? How do we value each other, support each other, include each other? Having that human centricity, because that's really what it's all about. Having that human centricity as part of your culture is going to help differentiate you, and it's going to help you be an attractor and retainer of talent. So that's why I decided, I've kind of learned over time that we actually need to have more of a point of view and including human beings in the culture when we're designing it. So that's the focus.
I'm chatting with a leading expert in organizational culture. That's once again the former Microsoft director, co-founder of the employee experience software company Limeade, and now the head of the Paris Phoenix Group. That is the one and only Laura Hamill. We're going to talk all about her book, The Power of Culture, when we come back in just a moment. Well, welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with an expert on an organizational culture, and that's Laura Hamill. Laura, again, welcome back. Your new book, The Power of Culture, is coming out. What motivated you to write this book, and who is the intended audience?
Yeah. So I was motivated on a couple different levels. I'd say, first of all, over and over again, as I mentioned before, I see culture as kind of core and fundamental to anything that organizations are trying to do, right? So there's a lot for us to understand about culture. So that was one of the reasons. But the other reasons, I just keep seeing this gap between what the science of organizational culture tells us and what the actual practice of culture looks like. And so I felt like, gosh, there's got to be a way to bridge that gap a little bit more to help people who are in the practice of focusing on culture understand what the science says in a more digestible way. So those are some of the reasons. And, I call it The Power of Culture because I really have been the recipient and also the participant in creating cultures where I've seen it be so amazingly beautiful and powerful. And I also wanted to call it Power of Culture because of the role that leaders play in really making culture come to life. So those are some of the motivations.
I love it. Laura, despite the challenges you've outlined, you remain optimistic about organizational culture. What gives you hope for the future of work?
Yeah. There's a lot of things. We tend to see the really bad things that a lot of organizations do. That's what makes the news. That's what we pay attention to. But I get to work with lots of organizations that are actually very honest and earnest in their work on culture. And so I see them rolling up their sleeves and doing that work and really having intentions that play out really well for employees, where they are working to create cultures that are aligned with their strategies and that end up also being great for the employees who work there. So I'm privy through my work to get to see some really great organizations that put the work in.
Laura, before we conclude, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to a leader listening into this program who's looking to create positive change within their organization's culture?
Yeah, I think first is just understand your culture. I think sometimes people think this is so hard. It feels really ambiguous. It feels hard to get my arms wrapped around, but you can. And you have to just talk to people. You have to make the intention of understanding what's really going on, and don't assume that your own experience as a leader is the same as what everybody else is. In fact, lots of research shows that that's just not the case. So be curious, seek to understand your culture, and really make sure that you are understanding the connection of your culture with your business strategy. It's going to be really hard for you to achieve those goals if the culture isn't working to support it, isn't pushing it forward. So that's what I would recommend, is be intentional about it, understand it, and connect it with your strategy.
Laura, this has been fascinating. Where can our listeners learn more about you, your work at Paris Phoenix Group, and your book?
Yeah. So ParisPhoenixGroup.com, Paris the city, Phoenix the city, group.com. And you can find my book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, really any place that you can buy your books.
Well, Laura Hamill, really appreciate you inspiring us on this program today. And we'll be sure to link in our show notes to make it easy for everybody to find the book.
Awesome.
And to get in touch with you. You're an open book, quite literally, with your story, and really appreciate, again, all the expertise that you bring to the table. Remember, you can always download podcasts from Get Down to Business. We've been on there for over 11 years with hundreds of interviews and guests. And you can find all of them on our website, syklein.com, or of course, go to our podcast page. Any of your favorite podcasts will have us. Just search for Get Down to Business, and be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and share. And remember to check out our sponsor, Tom Mirabali, for all of your health insurance and Affordable Care Act questions and needs. Although he's based in Chicago, he can support you around the country with answers to key questions. We call him our guru on everything health insurance. Just check out his website, healthplanchicago.com, healthplanchicago.com. That's a wrap for us this week. We'll see you next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on 956 The Answer, wherever podcasts can be found. To success, let's get down to business.